All right, welcome to It's Alive, where we host a space every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, to talk about developments in the world of UBI and meet with the people who are making it all happen. I'm Scott Santons. I've been researching, writing, and advocating for the concept of UBI for the last 10 years. For those new to the concept, UBI stands for Unconditional or Universal Basic Income. It's the idea that every individual in a society can and should be guaranteed a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement in order to make their way in the world upon a firm foundation. I recently started the Income to Support All Foundation, or ITSA Foundation, which provides support to projects that aim to make UBI a reality through research, storytelling, and implementation. You can learn more at itsafoundation.org. Coming up today, we do have a special guest with us. Her name is Jiaying Zhao, and she is from Canada and knows all about what's been going on in the political arena up there in the Great North, and also has quite a background in cognitive psychology. And I'm looking forward to getting into some of her research as well. And as always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth, who are the co-founders of Comingle. They're here as the UBI guy and Comingle One. Comingle is one of the first projects we're promoting at ITSA Foundation. Josh, can you tell everyone here what Comingle is all about?
Yes, Comingle is a money-sharing app that allows people to pool a percentage of their income into a community fund that gets divided up evenly and distributed as a weekly basic income. The result is that members give money when they have it and get money when they need it, so that no member ever goes a week without income. And you can learn all about it at comingle.us. And we're here.
Thanks, Josh.
We've got Conrad here too. We had been running a crowdfund. It's still going. I don't know if we have any updates on that.
It's not a whole lot. Just to let people know what it is. It was we ran the length of the crowdfund. It was a 1 month crowdfund, and we hit our target of 75,000. We got to around 81,000. And Indiegogo lets you keep it open, so it's an in-demand campaign now, and we're taking the money we used and we're ramping up development again and focusing mostly on that. But anytime one of our spaces goes viral or something, we have that crowdfund to direct people to. And the focus is more on getting as many people on that list as possible to show that social proof to build the community than it is about fundraising, but we're glad to raise money there as well. So yeah, check it out. It's a Comingle on Indiegogo. I'll put some links in the comments.
But yeah,
you can also find the link too by just going to comingle.us, right? That's a pretty easy way to do it.
It's right on there.
Yeah, and it's a foundation. It's all over any of our pages. So if you follow any of these things and search around, you can do it.
But the crowdfund money is currently being used to write actual code. It's in the works. Things are happening fast.
Oh, it's also being used to inspire larger funders to give us more of the money that we need for the budget. Yes. Kind of as the plan was, show that social proof. And then, yeah, we had a couple people drop in 25,000, 10,000. We're going to talk to some people about bigger donations. So yeah, it really is the beginning of sort of us stepping out and testing the power of the community to make bigger things happen.
Yeah, the more people who show their support, the better. Like, it would still be great to get over 1,000 founding members, to make sure that we can say, hey, look, like, there's 1,000 people that really actually want to join Comingle as soon as they can.
Yeah.
So I'll throw this at the end too, like I always do. But for people curious, and I'll put look at the post I put, all the different ways to connect. But follow us all on, on here on Twitter and stuff. But also, there's a Comingle YouTube channel that's really fun. Josh just put a fun new video in there, and these spaces are all in there. And you can go to itsafoundation.org and comingle.us and get on the newsletters.
Thanks, Conrad. So next up, I would usually do just a little bit of news roundup to talk about just the recent happenings, like last week in UBI, whatever developments have happened. But today, we're actually really looking to focus on the news that's been happening in Canada. And so I'd really just like to get right to it by welcoming Jiaying Zhao to speak with us today. And thank you for being here. Thank you for everything you've been doing up there in Canada too. And personally, also just thank you for like some of the research you've been doing. I just was fascinated when it comes to the psychology of basic income and things like scarcity research and cognitive burdens and how much of a difference like reduced stress would have on the way people think and behave and the way the society works. So yeah, welcome to our space here today.
Thanks, Scott. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh,
Can
perfect.
you just say your name the way you pronounce it, just so I hear it from you?
Sure, yeah. It's Jiaying Zhao, but you said it perfectly. But
Cool.
I go by Jay-Z, so
Ooh,
please
even
call me
cooler.
Jay-Z.
All right. I waited on Jay-Z one time when I worked at Yankee Stadium. I totally embarrassed myself. So maybe this is my redemption.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. I also want to just give a shout out to Senator Kim Pate. She's also in the audience.
Oh, great.
Yeah. I don't know if she's able to speak. She has a busy day today at the Senate, but she's the sponsor of the bill. So I'm glad that she can join us today too.
Well,
Yeah, thank you for being here today, Kim.
She can request to speak, and we'll immediately allow her to speak if she wants to. So if she's listening.
All right, so let's start off with like there's just so much to talk about, but let's even just start off with summarizing for listeners what the recent report that came out of Prince Edward Island. I think that's a good starting point, and then leads into what's going on in the House and Senate. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of movement in Canada. It's great momentum. You see the PEI report that just came out last week. I think even the week before that, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador has announced to do basic income with their seniors. We have a number of provinces here that are actively discussing a demonstration project, for instance, the Yukon and BC. So a lot of great progress here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, could you summarize just what's happened in Prince Edward Island with that report, and even just like a little bit of context for people, since probably most of our listeners are American, just kind of the interesting uniqueness of Prince Edward Island, and I know there's even like a history of support for basic income there too.
Yeah, so PEI is a small province in Canada. I think it's around 120,000 people. Also experiencing a lot of poverty in the province. So there has been historic support for basic income in Canada. This is dating all the way back to the 60s and 70s, with bipartisan or cross-party support for basic income. But we, as you know, we had the Mincome experiment, so the basic income experiment in Manitoba in the 70s that ended after 5 years. We recently had a basic income trial in Ontario that ended prematurely because of the government turnover in 2018. So I think there were, presidents in this country to support and actually conduct basic income programs. But it's been, as you know, on and off, given the administrations in power. And but what we've seen in the last couple of years is there's increasing demand for guaranteed basic income in Canada, because there's so many people falling through the cracks of the existing social system services and programs. People are increasingly being marginalized, especially during and after COVID. The pandemic has caused, actually a surge in poverty and homelessness in Canada. So I think we need to do something to radically change the system and actually to improve the system so that no one experiences poverty and everyone has income security to thrive. I think that's the demand side. And I was fortunate to get involved in this movement, partly because of Senator Kim Pate's invitation to testify in the Senate on the basic income bill. And I've been working on poverty reduction and cash transfers in the last 10 years or so. So I was fortunate to bring my research to use in the service of public policy change. So this is where I came in.
Yeah, and when you just testified recently, just like a matter of a week or two or so?
Yeah, in October.
Oh no, yeah. So about a month.
Weren't you also testifying last week?
That wasn't a testimony. That was just a presentation to the Senate, to the independent senators group. That was last week.
How'd that go? How did that go?
It went well. I think so in last week's presentation, I presented the myths and facts around basic income. So I went over a couple of myths such as inflation, work disincentive, and the kind of the misperceptions of what basic income is and what the consequences are. And I also presented facts that counteract those myths.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, since that is such a common thing, what was it that, if you can nutshell this, how did you explain the fear of inflation and to your audience? So I know I've
Scott,
explained that so many times.
Yeah, I know you had a great article that I keep referring people to.
Oh, great!
Will BI cause inflation? I think this is the biggest concern. So I think that the good news here is that even economists and people who are against basic income say that BI is not going to cause inflation. So this is, I think, there's a consensus in the literature among the experts that this is actually an unwarranted concern, and there are several reasons for that. I think the number, I think there are two reasons for not causing inflation. One is basic income is not printing more money, unlike past cash transfer programs that government just prints more money to help people. So it's effectively redistributing taxes and other cash or liquidity among the government. And the second reason is the increased demand of goods and services may be met by the increased supply of goods and services, right? So I mean, what we've seen from Alaska is the inflation in Alaska has been lower than the rest of the U.S. since the inception of the Alaska Permanent Fund. So there are theoretical and empirical reasons for not causing inflation. Then following this point, there's also the fear that basic income will cause rent increase. So if people receive more cash, effectively that all will go to the landlords. That's the other myth. So the tenants themselves are not actually going to benefit directly, and the rent will go up, and so that will cancel out the basic income. I think that's another myth. The reason being, not everyone will spend all the money from BI on rent. I think that's kind of like, what we've seen in the past trials. That's not at all the case. People will, spend the money on other necessities like food, clothing, transit, education, etc. So that's one reason it won't necessarily cause rent increase. Another reason is, the landlords may actually be incentivized to improve the quality of housing, especially low-income housing. with basic income, because now tenants have the ability to negotiate and to even to switch homes if their current housing quality is low. So
yeah, it's like you increase competition between landlords
exactly,
across the entire country.
exactly. So in fact, in Manitoba, where there's currently the portable housing assistance, which is essentially a cash transfer to the tenants, there's no general increase in rent overall with the portable housing assistance. There is a slight increase in the lowest quality housing. So this is the kind of the social housing or affordable housing where the conditions tend to be horrible. So what we saw there was actually landlords upgraded their homes to which I think is a good thing, and therefore increased rent by a little bit, so that people can live in higher quality homes. But that's only a fraction of the housing market.
Well, part of it to me too is that a lot of people propose or argue against UBIs if it exists in a vacuum. We already have an issue of housing prices being artificially inflated by the fact that real estate entities and speculators gobble up just a ton of the market and a ton of like the available housing, and that's true with or without UBI. Like cash in one's pocket gives people options. Basically, the more options to own or to rent with people or to choose something else or to move somewhere else. And in general, that empowers the negotiation. But I always like to point out that you need to make sure we're not forgetting that we still need housing regulation, and UBI doesn't exist in a vacuum. We still need some sort of thing that's not letting Airbnb gobble up half the market, or a bunch of foreign speculators or whatever. We need to create the access as well. It has to be a competitive market.
Oh, exactly, Conrad. I mean, BI is not going to solve housing supply. We need more housing development. We need more housing, period, and also affordable housing. That's in tandem with BI. So that's The other factor is, at least in Vancouver, I don't know about the rest of the actually I don't know about U.S. cities as much, but in Vancouver, this is one way that the landlords can increase rent is they kick out tenants, and once the tenants leave, landlords can increase rent dramatically, like by 10, 20, 30%. But if the tenants remain in the housing, in the apartment, let's say, there's legal limit in the rent increase. I think in BC, the limit is about 3% a year. So this means, by turning over tenants, landlords can, make more money from rent. And this is partly why we have a housing crisis in Vancouver. So what BI does to the tenants is they can actually stabilize their tenancy so they can remain housed, therefore stabilizing rent. So that's another, I think, potential benefit of basic income.
I think an additional one too, along that same line of reasoning, is basic income also functions as like greater access to legal resources, and recourses, so that if a landlord is trying to kick someone out, usually if someone like I can't afford a lawyer, I can't afford to go to court, so then they just get kicked out. But if you actually have some greater ability to use the court system, then it becomes more possible to actually protect yourself from that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Quick tangent. There's this idea I've always had, and maybe you have an idea on it since you're more into policy than me. But going back to the whole speculators gobbling up land and apartments and everything situation, and I try to imagine what could be a policy to mitigate a lot of that. And in my engineering brain, I feel like there could be like an exponentially growing property tax. You pay the regular property tax on your first property, and then 50% more on your second property, and just keep bumping it up to the point where if someone's got 100 properties, they're paying 40 times the tax unless they're abiding by some sort of rent control standards. So either if you want to just speculate a whole lot of property, you're going to have to be paying a lot more in to have that right, or you can abide by standards of affordable housing. Is that a stupid idea? Am I breaking the economy? Or is that something you think has legs?
Well, first of all, like, I mean, I would love a land value tax. I know it's quite different than a property tax. So I don't know if you're just talking about
I mean, I would do that with a
actual
land
property
value tax too. Like every individual plot of land that you get,
But would you, yeah, but you would
have an
need to,
escalating tax.
because
It wouldn't. Yeah.
if you have 10 pieces of property and you owe a land value tax on all your property, then of course you're going to owe a lot of tax. And if you owe 20 pieces of property, then you owe even more tax. And so, there's no reason to complicate it by, somehow introducing the bureaucracy of, how many owners, how much land and where that someone have. Instead, it's just, hey, who owns this land? All right, well, they owe, a 1% fee on the land value.
Right, but that just means land is finite, right? So if you
Yeah.
have the capital to gobble up 100 pieces of land, it's the same sort of investment deal to you as someone who has the capital to have one piece of land. But if you gobbled up the 100 pieces of land, like it's the same investment value under a flat tax on land. But if you gobbled up 100 pieces of land and there were only 100 to begin with, then there's none left. But if instead of your 100 pieces of land being 100 pieces of tax, it's 10,000 pieces of tax because there's a finiteness surcharge. Like the more you gobble up per person, the higher proportional tax rate you would pay. That I know. We don't have to go too far into this. I'm just wondering if there's a smart way to disincentivize. I thought of it because of that article you wrote, Scott, about
for intellectual property.
Where the first year it benefits the people who are investing in their time into the intellectual property at the beginning, but after 100 years, the tax is so high that if either it's not worth it to you to hold on to the claim anymore, or it is, and you're paying a ton of taxes, so you're still kind of like paying for the right for it.
Yeah.
In general, this is a good idea. In my mind, the idea of an ever-increasing tax on the more land you have, and I think that, would something like that work in Canada?
Yeah, I want Jiaying's opinion on this because
yes,
I'm just speculating.
We don't need to hear from you, Scott. We can read all your article.
Yeah, I mean,
I just wanted to clarify.
I think I support the increasing taxes for more properties, and this is what we've seen in BC, where I lived. We actually introduced an empty home tax a couple years back, where if you're not living, we call it principal residence, for more than 6 months of the year, you have to pay a hefty tax on that empty home. So there's been more disincentives to own more properties, but I think it's not. I don't think that will solve the housing crisis per se, because it's not that I buy a lot of houses and then rent them out, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I just think that there needs to be more housing development, period, one, and of having affordable housing units, a lot more affordable housing in the city. I think that's where the government needs to come in, or the different municipalities need to come in and just mandate that.
Yeah.
I think effectively we need policy change and not lay the onus on the landlords per se. But that's just my personal view.
Yeah, we've gone off on a tangent, and I just want to get back to getting people up to date on what actually has been going on in Canada, and just get back to the PEI report. I want listeners to understand more about that and just how exciting it is that essentially there's been good support for PEI the entire time that I've been in the basic income space, and also very, very cross-partisan support. I think that's one of the biggest things, is that virtually like every member, every party in PEI basically is supports this, and the report was almost, I think, 2 years in the making, at least a year and a half, and they're looking to do, what kind of PEI wide demonstration program could be done. They're looking at a 5 to 7 year, like very large, long duration pilot, and with a specific design and cost sharing between the province and the national government. And they even did some, calculations of impacts on poverty. And like one of the things I thought was particularly interesting was, first of all, Canada already has the Canada Child Benefit. And for Americans listening, that is effectively our enhanced child tax credit that we had for 6 months. Instead, they've actually had it for years now. And with that already existing, the basic income pilot in PEI would reduce child poverty by 65%. So, it's like just because you have an amount for kids that's very effective in reducing child poverty. But of course, as long as the adults in those households have low incomes and low economic security, then that is still a problem that the basic income helps solves. And just to add too, that this is actually one of the reasons why the basic income has legs in Canada, is that you've got this essentially these basic income floors for kids and for seniors, and really it's just trying to plug that hole between like age 18 and age like 65, and that's kind of where the discussion is at. And now let's, I guess, unless you want to add some more about PEI, it'd be great to get into the two bills that are in both the House and Senate, and what those are looking to do in reality, and maybe even talking about the ridiculous conspiracies and stuff that are, and what people believe that those bills are about, and what they're absolutely not actually about.
Yeah, so let me maybe start on with the PI, then I would love to move to the bill that Kim sponsors. So as you said, Scott, the PEIs and the guaranteed income, basic income for people between the age of 18 and 64. It's designed to offer maximum benefit of 80% of the poverty line. So this is translating to dollars. It's $19,000 for a single person and $27,000 for a family of two, based on the 2022 dollar. And for every additional dollar earned by the family, there's a kind of a reduction of 50% from the income assistance. As you said, this does not include youth who already will receive the child benefit, or the seniors who are receiving or are the old age security and guaranteed income supplement. Mm-hmm. And it's based on this design, it can cut poverty by 80% within this age group. Yeah, so I think this report is officially published, and I think what will happen next is the negotiation between the province and the federal government in terms of how to fund it. So that's the kind of next step. The bill. Is there anything you want me to say about the PEI report before I move on?
I had a quick question on one of the things you said. I just noticed you said the poverty line is 18,000 and 27,000 for a couple or something like that. It seems, how does that stack up against the U.S.? It seems significantly higher, but is that just because of the currency change, or have you drawn your poverty line with a more generous, definition?
Oh, right. So, I mean, we have a higher wage to start with, and we do. I mean, I think there are many reasons why the poverty line in Canada is much higher than the U.S. I mean, I can't. I can't fully explain it. I think maybe someone else can explain it better. We have like our federal minimum wage. I think it's Let me just make sure I'm not getting this. I think it's close to $14 at this point. Let me just look it up quickly. Oh, sorry, it's $16.65 per hour. Whereas in the US, it's I think $7.25. And we also have higher kind of prices overall. So there are I think there are just a number of reasons why the poverty line is much higher in Canada. And this is designed. I think the income program is designed to meet at the 85% of the line, is not to give 100% so that nobody's in poverty. There's still 15% below the poverty line from this program.
Do you see the poverty line in Canada as a survivable level, or
it's not livable? I mean, depending on where you are. Well, in Vancouver, for instance, the livable wage is $25 per hour, whereas the minimum is $17. So I think it provides enough income for you to live, but not live in a wealthy lifestyle. I think it can address basic needs. That's the bottom line. You will be able to afford food and shelter.
Just some quick math I just did to add a little bit to for listeners is the poverty line in Canada, 19,252 for a single adult. That money in terms of USD value is 14,160, and then if you set the same kind of number for 85% of that, then you're looking at $12,400. So that's right around $1,000 per month. So yeah, it just sounds a lot higher in Canada.
Yep.
One other thing I guess I'd add to before we move on to the House and Senate bills are, again, just I know some people are going to be confused by the phase-out rate. And so that's a 50% phase-out rate, which is, this is a negative income tax kind of design versus, fully universal basic income that just, applies the tax to earned income instead of phasing out the benefit. And that means it's not technically UBI, but UBI is a form of guaranteed basic income, as is negative income tax. So these are both ways of going about guaranteeing a basic income, and we can argue which one is better, or also which one is more politically viable. And when it comes to Canada, I would say, based on the fact that these existing programs for kids and seniors already exist along the same design lines, that it only makes sense, politically to go along those same lines.
Yeah, it is. You're right. It's not universal basic income. It is there's clawback as the income of family increases. So it's a form of guaranteed income. Yeah, you're right.
But just to clarify, this isn't like a demonstration sort of a pilot. This is meant to be an ongoing policy that's funded, that anyone is eligible for, given the clawback. Like, this is for the whole province, or is this that's my question.
This is for the whole province. This is not a demonstration project. It's a program that will be launched if the federal government and the provincial government agree to co-fund it.
Although I did read that it would be a 5 to 7 year program, but maybe not so much a pilot as in like we're going to do it for at least this long, and hey, if it works, then it'll continue.
But that's what a pilot is. That's
all a pilot should be.
We call all these other things pilots, but they're really just demonstrations. Pilot is supposed to be something you can just, allow to keep going because it's working. So I think this is like the first pilot is being
right. So I mean, there's a time limit to this program, and I think as the program runs, there will be evaluations to examine the the impacts of this transfer, BI program. Whether this will continue after 5 to 7 years, I think that's unknown. If it turns out there are vast social, let's say, returns, then I can't see how it wouldn't be continued. But I think that's again another negotiation.
Right.
The only thing that worries me about it is some sort of demonizability of the receiving class versus something that's more universalized. But I mean, you can run into that with, I think, a UBI policy that ends up taxing the rich more as well. I'm curious. So maybe you said some of this stuff before, but in terms of funding mechanisms, there's the back and forth when we talk about it in America of like, well, it's really hard to do a state level one because states don't have the luxury of a fiat currency that they can print and send it out and then tax it back later to, quote unquote, fund it. But the federal government could do it. So the federal government is seen as like the North Star. If you're doing something in a province, what is this funded through some sort of resource thing like the Alaska Permanent Fund? Is this funded with money from a federal government? I actually don't really know how it works as much in Canada. So yeah, how's that work?
Yeah, so it will be co-shared by the government, the provincial government and the federal government. So I think the exact split would depend on the negotiation between the two levels of government. But there are ways to, it's not that you are paying every dollar. This is we need to pay them out of pocket. But there are existing programs that can be streamlined to afford this. So there's already income assistance in PEI that basically can be incorporated into the basic income program. There's also this federal GST credit for program that's another form of social assistance that can be incorporated. So
when you say incorporated, you mean sort of replaced by, or
yeah. So that's right. So instead of getting the income assistance, paycheck welfare check every month, this will replace the basic income check will replace that.
I'm glad to hear that. We have this weird discussion and like adamant fight in the U.S. about you can't ever replace any sort of welfare program because I think we're holding on to it because it's all we got, and we have an underfunded welfare program.
So here's the principle. The operating principle is that nobody's left worse off than the status quo, right? So let's say in BC, the income assistance is it's actually really high. It's over $1,000 at this point per person per month. So if BC were to run a basic income program, that means the basic income check has to be equal or greater than the $1,000 check that they're already getting. So that's the idea. So it's not that you're getting less than what you currently receive.
This is encouraging that the design seems to be a lot more thoughtful than some of the other ones I've seen put out there.
This is designed by an expert team of economists, academics, policymakers for the last 2 years. So it's actually really well designed.
It's funny. I mean, when I think of economic design, though, I feel like people like you are maybe the most important. I make this case all the time that economists, to be worth their salt, should have to do two things that they're not currently required to do. Is take human behavioral psychology, so they really know what they're talking about when they're making assumptions about people's behavior. And they should have to spend a year or two doing social work, because the policies that come out of economists are like, what are they? All their assumptions baffle me,
Yeah, so I'm not an economist. I'm a psychologist. I just know a lot of economics because I work with a lot of economists.
Right. I think that probably makes you a better economist as your human behavioral psychology background, because you're not assuming that everyone's just like an asset maximizing machine. They're people,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's what one of the reasons why I just became so interested in basic income in the first place. I think is because my own educational background is in psychology, and it just really interests me, like human behavior. What is actual human behavior? Not like the myths, but like what actually drives people to make certain decisions and not others. Like what is the mechanisms in the brain? That's why I wanted to get into some cognitive science later. But I love that stuff. So yeah, I think if economists actually better understood that, it would help economics for them to actually better understand the decisions people actually make and why versus these like really weird models that they use.
And also understand the consequences of the policy.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the policies are designed based on a kind of a naive view of how society works and what the unintended consequences would be. I think this is also the downside of the current social assistance programs. Is actually end up marginalizing more people than it intended, and there's so much stigmatization and stereotyping around recipients.
Well, that's also why I said social work too, because they do miss the human psychological aspects of it, but they also largely miss the implementation logistics of just how and why top-down paternalistic targeted programs are just so bad at what they do. It's an overwhelming bureaucratic load for someone to handle it. It's just not an elegant design at all, And if you work in social work, you're confronted with that immediately and every single day, just how absurd it is what we ask people to do, not just how demeaning it is, but just how much of a waste of their time it is.
Mm. Yep.
So we've got this very nicely designed program set up, and it's in front of people deciding on it. This is like a dream scenario where it's so close to like actually being a reality. What's the battle like to actually get it passed? Like I understand like the sort of mentality of the U.S. and why we oppose things, but what's it like in Canada? What are you up against?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm not involved in that negotiation in the PEI program, but I am somewhat involved in the basic income bill advancement in the Senate. I'm trying to help gather evidence and provide evidence of what this program would do. So, are we okay to move on from the PEI project to the bill? Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, awesome. Because then I can give you a better understanding. I don't have much insight in the PEI operations going forward. So this bill is sponsored by Senator Kim Pate. I think her office is actually in the audience today. So this is it's called Bill S233. It's an act to develop a national framework for a guaranteed livable basic income. The bill is actually really simple and short. If you read it, it's actually just like 2 pages, I think. Mm-hmm. It's a legislation to set up a national framework for the implementation of a guaranteed livable basic income in Canada. It doesn't specify what basic income or this guaranteed livable basic income program will look like, because we need extensive consultations between the federal government and the provincial and the municipal government and Indigenous governing bodies in Canada. So that will, that negotiations will happen if this bill passes. So this, it's basically calling for the Minister of Finance to start consultations with different levels of government and governing bodies. And it also sets out, several principles, like it must constitute a basic livable basic income for each region in Canada, taking into account the existing goods and services that are necessary for people to lead a dignified and healthy life. To set national standards for health and social supports for implementing this program, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and then also leave no one worse off, and have. Again, there will be no labor market requirement for receiving the basic income. So that's effectively what the bill says. And it actually has passed the second reading in the Senate. Right now, the Senate of National Finance Committee is actively studying the bill. We just had the second hearing on the bill. And hopefully it will move to the third stage in the Senate. And assuming this passes the Senate, it will be passed over to the House for them to study the bill. So we're currently at the kind of the passing the second reading, and the committee's actively studying the bill at this point.
We're basically voting whether or not. So the bill is we're going to really take this seriously and research it. So you're voting on whether you're going to do that, essentially. Like as a nation, we're going to really research this idea, and
That's right.
Then
yep, that's why
get behind looking into it.
Yeah, that's why the committee is calling upon experts throughout the country that offer both views supporting the bill versus views that oppose the bill, or that would raise concerns on this bill. Yeah, so that's where the bill is at, and I don't know if there's something similar in the U.S. at the federal level, but I've seen at the state level there are state governments wanting to do guaranteed basic income. I think I just saw New Jersey, publishing a proposal on the basic guaranteed basic income, as well as other states that I've talked to in the past. So, I would love to see the kind of the even the kind of across country differences between Canada and U.S. Do you see, for instance, like a bill at the federal level being proposed in the U.S. at this point?
Yeah, I don't, especially right now. But as far as Trump's tax cuts that were passed in 2017 will be expiring in 2025, and so then there'll be a lot of talk as to what do we do? Like, do we extend those tax cuts? Do we utilize that revenue for something else? And do we lean into like at that point too the child tax credit that we temporarily expanded will be reduced back to what it was before Trump. Like a lot of people, aren't aware that the child tax credit here was $1,000 per year, and then under Trump he doubled that to $2,000 per year, and then we did the temporary thing in 2021 when we boosted that further, and then that expired. So there's just a lot of ability in there to possible discussion for, especially what do we do with the child tax credit? Do we make it? Do we re-expand it again as it exactly as it was, or do we compromise in some way so that it's better than it is, but not as good as it could be? And I would love to see some kind of additional discussion around, like, say, a carbon tax and dividend, kind of set up here in the U.S. as part of that discussion too. Whereas if we actually did manage an annually rising carbon tax, paying out a UBI, that could be potentially small UBI. Maybe it could be something like $50 or $100 a month or something at first, depending on whatever he set it at. But I do think that that's probably the best possibility for a fully universal UBI in the U.S., since everyone would be like, well, I'm paying the carbon tax, and what are we taxing? The atmosphere. We all own it. You should universalize that benefit. And so that's what I think the most possibility is.
I think strategically that's very strong too. Similar to kind of some of the inklings I'm getting from the PEI pilot is I've always thought, once something that is sufficiently UBI enough to be strong enough as a policy to get tried in a medium to long term way, then it's going to be really hard to get rid of it because it's helping everybody. So it's political suicide to take it away at that point, even more so than like Social Security. And so it'll take hold. I think of it like a viral sort of a growth thing. Like once there's like a tentpole UBI somewhere, similarly in the U.S., I don't think it has to be, a full-blown poverty level or livable UBI to fill that role. I think the impacts of even a partial UBI to start would demonstrate massive gains, and as long as you've built the infrastructure with say like a carbon tax, there's everyone's getting their $100 a month. Then all of a sudden, when we run into something like, okay, we're expiring these tax cuts for the rich, we have this much extra funding. It's like, well, this program's working. Why don't we just throw this extra revenue into the check? Like we start looking for things to add into the check that no one's ever going to get rid of because it's everyone's check. I kind of think so. I feel hopeful about the way you described the PEI pilot, at least, and maybe that helps the case for the bill. Is there any crossover there?
Yeah. Actually, I think the Senate committee might use PEI. This is my hope is use PEI as a model for the country to set up this program, and not just in one province. So the Parliamentary Budget Office has actually estimated how much this will cost and how can we afford this if we implement this on a national level. So this is what the Budget Office has come up with. So this is again with people between the age of 18 and 64, because as I said, the youth and seniors have already basic income programs at this point. So they will receive close to $17,000 per person, or for couples, $24,000 per year. Again, for every dollar additional earned income, that will be a 50% reduction. And this effectively will, this basic income program will disappear for individuals earning over $34,000 and for couples earning over $48,000. So it's maybe this. I think this is the difference between guaranteed income versus universal income. Is actually this is income tested to some extent, and
do you think there'd be any? I mean, I've sort of given up on Canada being open to this, but the real mechanism. I mean, I spent a lot of time studying the mechanism of the funding, UBI calculator, and building a thing that basically functions like a government mechanism. A negative income tax model that phases out and then just cuts off, that is also funded by taxation and stuff, becomes this sort of mishmash of things that forces the government to first identify, like ahead of time, who qualifies, where the initial identification process is where a lot of people fall through the holes, or where it becomes bureaucratic and burdensome, or when people are waiting, where a properly understood universal basic income, like people think universal means everyone gets extra. It just means everyone gets that floor, and it allows, especially at a federal level, I think it's easier at a federal level. You basically the country floats the money to everyone up front and then taxes it back from everyone, and it can be designed to have the exact same theoretical money transfer. Like the same people are getting the same amount of money, the same people are paying the same amount of taxes, except no one's waiting to see whether or not they qualify. No one's actually tasked with qualifying people. It's all handled through just taxing it back. So you lose a lot of these pitfalls of paternalistic targeting that are unnecessary in my mind.
I mean, I think I absolutely agree with you on that. I think this is going to be delivered through the tax system. So, but you still have to set up the clawback scheme for the middle to higher income earners, right? So it's not that you have to apply for this; you automatically get it. It's just that for middle higher income folks, they get it, but they don't actually they don't receive it then, because all of it is taxed back. So
right. If they're drawing a line somewhere, then you do at some point have to prove you're below the line to get it and then get it clawed back. And that the fact of that line creates a department that has a new job that has consequences, whereas you could just give it to everyone and then tax it back in such a way that anyone who would be above that line is giving it back without having to create the line in the first place. You know what I'm saying? It's just like a little accounting hack so that you don't have to build an extra bureaucratic department to enforce the line, because the line already takes care of itself through the taxation mechanism.
Right. I think that's still possible. I think depends on, again, how the government designs this at the end. But I do think that just giving people the check and tax it back at the end, it's probably the most simplest system.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, even the guaranteed, I mean, it's like a missed opportunity to me, but even what's being proposed as more of a negative income tax is a big step forward from what we currently do with our welfare program. So I'm not trying to crap on that, and I wouldn't stand in the way. I just there's a way to do it even easier.
I just want to add some context too, that that we could get into a little bit more potentially, but there's like kind of a weird like difference between the way the U.S. and federal government and our states work as far as taxes go, and the way that Canada does it as far as at the federal level and the regional, the province level, whatever. Um, and so like the maximum like national tax bracket is like 33%, and then if you look at like British Columbia, then the top tax bracket is 20%. So like together you're looking at 53%, in which case, you could look at that with a 50% phase out rate and, oh, that's pretty similar, but also it's split up between these two things that it's almost like half and half. It's not quite like more like 60-40 or whatever, but like it's certainly different than the US where pretty much it's mostly federal income taxes. And then, there's even states with no income taxes. And then there's states with, potentially as high as, 7-10% or something maximum. So there's definitely a difference between Canada and the US that way. JZ, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you, Scott. I think one thing that's missing in all of the reports that I've seen on basic income is the social returns of investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually, the parliamentary budget officer was explicitly asked, did you take returns into account? And I think they didn't, because their job is to cut out the budget, to estimate the budget with expenses. And I think this is a missed point, that people think this is just money spent on this program and it's expensive. In Canada, it's going to be, it's close to 87 or even $88 billion per year. So I would like to mention the social return on investment. So it's not that that's money just spent every year for nothing. There's actually a lot of cost savings that can come from this program that's often overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So go ahead.
Before we go on, I just want to make sure that can you stick with us for the second hour, or do you need to go soon?
No, I can stay for another hour.
Great. Okay.
Cool. Yeah. What we generally do is we start bringing in people's questions and stuff too. I have a million too, so I'm gonna try to cover them in.
So I just want to briefly speak on the social returns point. So based on the parliamentary budget officer's estimation, there's a separate group and they found that there's actually 106% returns from the estimation. So every dollar spent on basic income will generate $1.06 back. And this mostly comes from reduced, I think you touched on this before, reduced social reliance on social services, reduced health care costs, especially in Canada. That's been enormous in the country. Reduced crime, etc., increased employment. So I think that's actually so what this means is that this is a net, like they actually will save money from this investment as opposed to seeing this as a net cost.
Yeah, it truthfully pays for itself. It's not like the trickle down kind of pays for itself. It's then like, oh, if we cut taxes on the rich, this will totally pay for itself. Like, no, that is a lie. Like that is just a way of making the rich richer, to cut the riches, to cut taxes for the rich. But when it comes to what is essentially a fully refundable universal tax credit, so essentially you're increasing everyone's disposable income to some degree. It's most at the bottom, some at the middle, and none at the top, and even taxing at the top more. That actually does lead to economic growth. It leads to better savings, especially through the reduced stress impacts of the security of a basic income.
Yes, and this is what we've seen in our own studies with cash transfers. We saw 110% returns from an investment of $7,500 per person. So, and I would just that's a BC study, yeah. Right? And I would love to encourage all the pilot programs or demonstration projects that are happening right now to calculate that, I mean, that's kind of a missed
Yeah.
opportunity for existing programs, is to quantify the cost savings from this initial investment.
Yeah, they even did that from the the East Cherokee dividends in North Carolina, where, thanks to the Great Smoky Mountain Study of Youth ongoing, we were able to observe. I can't remember which economist. I can't remember who did the estimate, but he looked at looking at the total amount distributed by those dividends and found that the savings again exceeded 100% there as well, as far as reduced crime, improved health, and kids getting doing better in education, going further, so having more educated, getting better jobs, like all of this. It paid for itself. And so yeah, it's not like where where these studies happen, where they look at the actual returns on investments and see it as an investment and try to measure what those returns are. It does exceed 100% frequently. It's something that I would love to see more.
I think that's even a conservative analysis of it, because I mean, unless you know of one, but I don't think any is quantifying the opportunity cost savings. And I talk about this fairly often in these spaces, but we have a meeting coming up for Comingle development, where we're starting to look into more and more of like, okay, as we get closer, we want to really be good at quantifying data, impact data, essentially, like how many people are doing better, how many people are paying their bills, and the usual stuff, like how much is saved on not having to pay fees, and like the regular cost savings that you would imagine. But then also, what are the rising tide effects that you can measure across a group if you're doing something for a significant amount of time with a UBI pilot? Like how many people got better jobs? How much did the average income of the group of these same people rise compared to the general population? Because what we find in these pilots is people, when they have a basic income, they can take the time to find better jobs and earn more money outside of the basic income. And so you have this sort of virtuous cycle that happens of people who are normally scraping by, which is incredibly wasteful, and also wasting time on a lot of other things, further adding to the productivity. So we're not just saving on crime and medical emergencies that are avoided. We're saving on all the things that we lost before. We're getting those things that we wouldn't have got otherwise. And figuring out a way to measure that, I think it requires something that is, a saturated experiment, which is another reason the PEI or any sort of like more broad spread model is really interesting. Measuring the macroeconomic effects on Main Street and things like that, as well as over time. What is the lengthwise shift? A couple of years is enough to stop the bleeding in your life, make a couple of moves, get a leg up, and be in a better spot. But what happens if that extends perpetually and people have that psychological advantage of knowing they get to keep banking on this money coming in, that they get to keep, improving their lives and looking for the long term rather than the here and the now, and investing in, what they think is their most beneficial impact? How do you measure that across a society, across a pilot? And I think only with like all of these pilots we've had so far in the U.S., these temporary, limited, randomized ones, it's impossible to measure that kind of out effect to a big degree. But yeah, something
I'd also love to see.
Wide, yeah,
I'd also love to see pilots actually try to measure, like every pilot, try to measure unpaid work hours. It's kind of, I think it's pretty messed up that, let's say, a pilot would show, let's say it shows 10% reduced work hours, even though that's hardly ever happens. But let's say that it's 10% fewer work hours. But then if they looked at unpaid work hours, that increased, 15%, such that, like people are actually working more, but they're doing more unpaid work than paid work, in which case it would be good to at least add some kind of value let's say, it'd be a minimum wage or something, or some estimate of what the value of those unpaid hours are, to be able to show that like there is increased community participation, and it therefore increased, I would say just the economy as a whole would be doing better thanks to more people being more involved in their communities, even though people actually were doing less wage work. Like there's value to unpaid work that needs to be somehow estimated as part of these pilots too.
Yeah, I think this is where the economists come short. Or fall short of how to value the unpaid work, like caring for children and caring for elderly adults or the sick. There's no money, there's no dollar value that's put on those labor. But even if the reduced work hours, that's I think largely an assumption or another misperception, because that's not what we saw in past trials. I mean, in our own experiments in Vancouver, we saw actually like a 70% increase in work hours and a 50% increase in hourly pay after getting the cash transfer. And this is like amongst the most marginalized people experiencing homelessness. So, and in other BI trials, it's the work hours actually increased and the work pay increased as a result of getting the basic income, and not, we actually never see a reduction of work hours, except in those cases where, you need to take care of your family and children and seniors, etc. So, and we never put a dollar value on that, unpaid labor either.
So it's also true for people who aren't just in the extreme poor category, which is another thing. It sounds like the policy they're talking. I think 50% is maybe a steeper clawback rate than I would look at. But it sounds like it'll extend, above the poverty line or 200% of the poverty line. It'll be like, people earning more of a livable income, still getting some net benefit from it, and they'll turn that into added productivity and freedom and things too, which is another thing I'm excited about. Anytime you have it's not a universal, I guess, but it's a more universalized sort of pilot than what we've seen in these smaller demonstrations. I think just the amount of data that's going to come out of anything that happens province-wide or Canada-wide will dwarf the sorts of things we can glean from these limited demonstrations.
There's something else I'd like to discuss too, as far as what's been going on in Canada, and that I really like listeners to know about and consider just as a strategy in general, which is that there have been a lot of city councils and regional councils in Canada that have just been voting in support of basic income, at the federal level. So it's not like it doesn't do anything. It doesn't pass a pilot. It doesn't provide anything to anyone. It just says, hey, we're raising our hand in support of basic income. And I don't know what the total count is now. Maybe Jay-Z, as far as like, it being, I think it's at least a dozen. I don't know if it's as far as 20 yet, or maybe it's more than that. I don't know. But, another new one just happened recently. I think it was Halton region voted in support. But could you just talk a little bit about that approach and just what you think of all these different regions and cities saying, yes, we support this, let's do it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't have the exact number, but I think municipalities are expressing a bigger demand for basic income across Canada. So we have something called the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, or call it the City Mayor's Caucus. And I think basic income is going to be tabled at this caucus very soon because of this kind of increased demands for it. Because I think mayors see the struggles on the ground most vividly and directly than premiers, which is basically governors or the federal government. So they see a huge need to increase the income floor that's often missed at the provincial or the federal level. So I can get the exact numbers to you. How many municipalities need this or support this? So yeah, but that's right. We do see, a huge need here. This is, I think, consistent with the U.S. landscape, where I think that the recent report I saw just 2 days ago was something like 200 U.S. cities are experimenting with basic income at this moment. Is that right?
Yeah, it's approaching 200. It's over. I think it's around 150, somewhere around there. So it's not up to 200 just yet. But I do think that we'll hit 200 and go beyond that. Of course, we made it really easy, or made it a lot easier thanks to the American Rescue Plan that we did that gave a bunch of money to cities to spend. And so a lot of them just said, hey, we've got this money, let's do this. And I believe Canada didn't have like the same, approach as far as like giving a boatload of money to cities. So that put us in a different kind of situation where we could actually just do all sorts of different pilots around the country. And it was, great to see that happen. And I'm looking forward to a bunch of the results coming out. We've already seen some really great preliminary results and stuff, and I think that'll just add pressure. I think the American population will just see this just success after success after success and be like, why are we still testing this?
And
hopefully
it's success despite the fact that so one of the things Jay-Z said is that you're looking at $17,000 a year, whereas almost every single one of these pilots is $500 a household or something similar to that. Some are more generous. I think Sam Altman's Y Combinator one is more of like a full poverty line one, and that's what we wanted to run for our docuseries, where it's per adult. I guess I should ask Jay-Z, is it per adult or per household? Where how it's delivered, but the amount in general is more of a full poverty line thing, where I feel like there's this weird thing in the U.S. where we're, especially during a trial phase, why would we limit every single one of them or almost all of them to like half or a quarter of the full poverty line? This is the experimentation phase. Why aren't we experimenting with like at least include like a full UBI poverty line or a full guaranteed income poverty line in some of these pilots? I don't really understand how that came about, where it's just there's so many of these 500 a household. That is far below the poverty.
Yeah, I see the 500 per month number from the US, and I'm like, this is nothing. I was surprised that it's this low.
It's impactful, but it's not.
Yeah, and again, it's per household, or at least in a lot of experiments it is. Like there have been some experiments where two members of the household are part of the experiment. So then, it's therefore the combined is let's say 1,000 or 1,200 or whatever based on the individual payment. But yeah, for the most part, a lot of this is just one payment per for one adult in a household, regardless of any other adults or kids in the household.
Wow, so it's really low. That's a tiny amount.
I'm saying a lot of these things for Kim Pate's benefit, and whoever else from the office is there too. Is like there's a lot of things that people just like kind of glance beyond in the design of a thing that are very important considerations. So one of the other ones is the giving it to households rather than to individuals. We very conscientiously, we did $1,000 a month per adult, and then some for kids, and then it was separate checks. Each adult got their own account, and whatever the number is, the individualization of it, making each person a unique person, doesn't leave you open to this glaring hole of financial abuse. If you're sending it to a household, you're sending it to the person in charge of the finances of the household, and some of the people who need it most are, a victim of domestic violence has got to get away, has got to be able to take the kids. How are you helping that situation if you're giving their abuser more money? That's just more leverage. So I'm curious to know if that's part of the conversation, or to nudge that it should be individualized.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the current estimation in Canada is, I think, something around the 75% poverty line, or even 80% in PEI, and it's delivered, I think, based on the makeup of the family. So if you're a single adult, you get up to, let's say, $17,000 a year. But if you're a couple, a family of two, then it's 24,000. If you're a family of three or four, then the amount increases. So that's how it's currently designed. If you're in a family, then it's going to be by household.
Is there a way to take like that 24,000, which is less per person, but still split it up, and so each is getting 12? I think it's really important.
Right. So again, this is going to be delivered, I think, by default through the tax system. So each earning individual will receive, 12K. So the couple, if they're filing together, will receive 24K.
But if they're filing apart, or if they don't live together, I mean, it would be an incentive to say, well, let's be individual adults, because like then the total between us is, 38,000 instead of 19,000, or 27,000 if they were together.
Yeah.
So it creates a weird incentive at that point, and I'm curious
to separate.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of funny because it's an incentive to separate, but then it's also that takes the power away from the abuser to have two different people with two different bank accounts.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's kind of the incentive for having individual accounts or filing, as opposed to filing as a family. And I think
if it's through the tax system, is it yearly or is it monthly? Is it like a prorated or like a credit up front that's frequent and periodic, or is this just like a yearly?
It's a yearly tax return if you file. But yeah, but we also have 10% of the Canadians who don't file for taxes, so that's another kind of problem to solve.
Do we got some people that want to ask questions? It looks like there's a few hands up.
Yeah, we should bring in some of those. Robert's been waiting the longest, so we'll invite
ask
Robert
about
first.
The Canadian stuff too, or also Jay-Z has a lot of great stuff to talk about with human behavioral psychology. I
definitely wanted to get into more of that. Let's see. I don't know where Robert went.
I think he's on, but muted. There he goes. Okay.
Oh, okay. There's Robert. Hi, Robert.
Scott.
How you doing?
Good afternoon. Yes. I wanted to speak about the about an idea I had for to fund universal-based income, and also to build an emergency fund for income earners. That basically it's a legislation modeled after Obamacare. Let's say for sake of argument, it's called Obama Save, and what would happen is the government would pass a law requiring workers to put a 7% deduction after taxes of their paycheck to a high yield savings account of their choice at the institution of their choice. From there, it sits until the balance achieves a minimum threshold of, say, for the sake of argument, $2,500, and the APY would be about 2.5%. Again, for argument's sake. At that point, interest generated from the savings balance plus any incoming deposits would be collected by the government, and while the account holders keep the principal from each deposit and the balance overall, and the collected interest would then be dispersed and equally among the population as a full universal basic income. I'm guessing it would take about 3 to 5 years for those balances to achieve the threshold, in order to adjust for inflation and whatnot. But in fact, I posted a question on Quora about how savings accounts earn interest, right? And to one of the answers to that question, I posted this what I'm talking about right now. Um, so yeah, you can find me on Quora as well. If you look at my profile, you should be able to see the link to my Quora account.
Okay. Did you have a question for Jay-Z at all, or just wanted to share the idea with us?
That was what I was. I wanted to, I wanted to kind of bounce that idea off everybody's head, see what everyone wanted to discuss about it. Yeah, yeah, not like I know, I know the U.S. Congress isn't ready for it, but because if you recall, a few days ago, I commented on the Washington Journal. When Romina Boccia and Ben Lutz were on the show, and they both said, I believe Scott, you commented to me about that by direct message. Forgive my grossness.
Mhm.
Yeah, I hardly get to speak over the air about such things, right? Because I'm Washington Journal, and every time I get to call in, I only get a limited amount of time, like every other caller. All right.
Yeah, and that's I think it's good to point out just to other to listeners is that you've taken an approach where how do
If you
you
give me a second,
want to get
give me a second.
involved
I can
and
barely hear you. I'm trying to hold this up to my ear here.
okay, I'm just telling all listeners that what you've done is make a point of listening to Washington Journal and then trying to be a call-in, be accepted as a call-in and be able to bring up basic income and have like the guests talk about basic income part of it. So it's a cool approach. It's something that anyone can do to make a point of trying to encourage basic income discussion on whatever show that you may enjoy listening to or
What about my
whatever
idea
that
to
accepts some kind of call-in.
I don't I don't mean to
Sure,
interrupt, but
we
yeah, my initial reason for speaking now was to promote the my idea for funding basic income, right, through high yield savings accounts, right? Did you happen to hear any of that?
Yeah, I'm a
yeah,
little
yeah,
skeptical
I heard your
of
idea.
things like that. To cut to my opinion on it is like I feel like it's not necessary. I feel like a lot of people go toward things that we're used to in the economy that we have, where it's like you're used to hearing about investment schemes and generally making money off the savings and passive income. I feel like I like to simplify it all down and say we could do this as a direct redistributive tax and spend policy, or what's the way we're setting up Comingle is it's not based on like putting a giant pile of philanthropic funds into an account and letting the endowments spin off dividends go out to people. It's no, people are just sharing money that's already there, and it can work that way. I think it overcomplicates it to say we need to um, pay for UBI through some sort of gains. It's already worth it without doing that. Maybe when we have a system in place, we can find more and more effective ways to generate that revenue and that income. But I don't think we need to start there. And I think it kind of distracts from the purpose of UBI to get people on. But look how like this clever accounting Wall Street mechanism we can do to actually not actually have to pay anything for the money. All of that sort of sends up red flags for me in general, where I just want to.
Does Social Security do something like that when we're paying into this? I don't really understand
No.
where our money
Social,
actually sits when it's
Social Security, is
waiting
not
for us
even
to
like a
get it.
savings account.
No,
It's just
yeah.
it's kind of it's an illusion of a savings account where it has support for the payments when we retire because we all feel that we deserve it because we put money, quote, into the system. But what happened is just workers doing their prime working age years are just being taxed via payroll taxes and self-employment taxes, and those do not in any way equate to what you receive
Right. But the
as a
money
senior.
that's collected through that tax, like, it's sitting somewhere doing something?
No, it's not.
No. Okay.
All right, let's
But
get
it
a
is.
question for
It's a thought. Yeah.
Jay-Z. Let's
Yeah.
get something for her.
Okay, so um, first of all, I guess Edip or Edip, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but do you want to go next? And do you have a question for Jay-Z?
Hi, nice to see you. I am in Chicago airport, traveling from Tucson to Cincinnati. Therefore, quickly, I will first ask, I would like to interview you at my channel on this very important subject, that this must be popularized because of the increasing gap between haves and have-nots, and because of technology, many other issues, I think will accelerate the need for UBI system. I will ask you many questions. One of them, for example, we should have a list of objections, most common objections, and answers most likely you have. And the second, for example, we are going to increase, let's say, propose increase in UBI based on the number of children. The downside or the byproduct would be maybe some people will take advantage. They will just have more children. Therefore, there must be a way to maybe taking a diminishing return, do something else, maybe other programs together. But I do believe that using the bureaucracy and stigma, we have social institutions in so-called capitalist countries, and so much bureaucracy money is spent on bureaucracy and social stigma, and of course it's not sufficient. You are doing a great job, and I would love to meet you, a few of you at YouTube to popularize this idea. Thank you very much, but I don't have right now a good environment to talk. It is very noisy.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Listening.
All right. Thank you. So let's cover that topic. I mean, I've covered that so many times. I hear this so often as far as, oh, if you have a child component, then parents or adults will become parents for the profit of it, and it'll just be popping out babies for more money. And I'll tell you that it's the worst possible investment you could possibly make because of how expensive it is to have a kid, and how the amounts that go to kids just do not at all cover the actual full cost of raising a kid to 18. And Jay-Z, do you want to speak to that as far as like what you know from the Canada Child Benefit? Is that somehow causing Canadians to just pop out kids for the money?
That's not at all the case. I mean, that's not what we saw at all.
I just want to add, I want to know both empirically what you saw, but also if you have any insights in terms of just human behavior, like why do people do what they do regarding kids and money? Like what informs people's choices in real human behavior?
I mean, having kids is a huge decision. I don't think it's something that anybody takes lightly, and certainly not to get the additional, let's say, $500 a month, because the cost of raising a kid is enormously high in Canada. I'm assuming in the U.S. too. And that's not what the empirical data suggest either. But I do think that the kind of the genesis of this concern is the lazy welfare recipient stigma or stereotype, is that, oh, I should just try to maximize the benefits as I can and not even worry about the net costs of things. So yeah, I mean, I think that's all I have to say about that. But I do want to speak maybe briefly on the cognitive science side of basic income, because I think that's an important aspect, which again is not talked about at all in the literature or in the narrative. I think the key insight here is that basic income, let me back track a little bit. Poverty saps brain power. Mm-hmm. We actually lose so much human brain power, productivity, and well-being and human lives because of poverty. So that this is my prior research has shown is if you're experiencing poverty or scarcity of any sort, you actually perform at a much lower level than if you had the resources. So it just imagine how much, how many more jobs or other kinds of productivity we can have as a society if we have basic income. When we give cash out to people, we collect their stories in our own study, and the kind of the number one comment we got from participants is that it gives me peace of mind. Now I can make better decisions with this cash transfer, whereas I couldn't before. So I think this is another unquantified benefit that's often not talked about. Like, if I can sleep better, if I can make better decisions of pretty much anything in life, food, jobs, social relationships, et cetera, like, what are the savings? What's the value of that? I think we need to that's something we need to really consider, is just the human potential, the human cost of poverty, and therefore the potential of basic income.
I didn't know until just recently that you were one of the co-authors of the paper about scarcity that looked at the Indian farmers and the mall research. And
that was my
I love
PhD
those
research.
studies.
Yeah, I did
it's
that.
so awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, that was my PhD work. But I think we have continued to investigate that since then. But I think that's another aspect of the psychological, the cognitive, the brain power that.
Did you want to just summarize the mall experiment for people?
Yeah,
it's
that
just so
sounds
fascinating.
interesting. Yeah.
Sure. So what we did, this is like over 10 years ago, was we went to a shopping mall in New Jersey, and we presented financial problems to people. So let's say your car breaks down, it takes some money to fix. How would you go about it? So these are realistic examples that we ask people to simulate in their head, right? So your fridge breaks down, what would you do? It requires this amount of money to fix. And what we found was, for low-income individuals, when they couldn't really pay for this cost, their cognitive function, this is measured by a battery of cognitive tests, is significantly lower when they're dealing with these hypothetical financial costs in their head compared to higher income folks who can afford it. So that's the U.S. mall experiment. Then my colleagues actually collected additional data in India. This is with sugarcane farmers, where they had one harvest of sugarcane every year, and they get paid at the end of the harvest. So basically, within the same person, we can track their cognitive function before and after they get paid. So when they're poor versus when they're now much richer. And we found the same cognitive decrement when they're poor before the harvest than after. So those experiments allowed us to quantify the decline in cognition, or in other words, even quantify the IQ drops when people are in poverty versus when they're not. And that drop from that study was about 13 points drop in IQ, and that's basically aging 15 years, or loss of one night's sleep, or actually, that 13%, 13 drops in point drop in IQ is also sufficient to go from standard intelligence to borderline retardation.
Yeah, another comparison is inebriation, right?
Yeah, well, getting drunk, exactly.
Yeah.
Wait, are you saying I'm dumber than I was at 25? Like,
well, we all are. When I age 15 years, we lose about 13 points in IQ, and that's just how aging works.
I feel like I was a pretty dumb 25-year-old, and now am I just lying to myself? I was like, no, that guy.
This is purely on intelligence tests, right? This is not life skills or social skills, or this is just a very specific form of IQ.
What's the average peak? Like age peak, and then it starts going down.
That's
obviously it goes up.
Yeah, it's about between 20 and 30 years old.
Okay.
Dang. I'm curious, and so a lot of these studies, they talk about bandwidth, and they talk about IQ, and they talk about brain power as one way to measure, and like cognitive ability. And in my mind, I break it up into two different things. For one, I get a little I get a little on edge when it comes up to just like, cognitive ability and potential, because there's so much emotional capacity tied up in how someone does, right? And I feel like it's mixed in, and this is just it's like a measure for all of it, just like GDP is like a limited measure for all of it. But I'm wondering, in your studies, do you make an attempt in some way to measure the messier elements too? Like I know my cognitive performance goes up when I just have more bandwidth, like I have more time, right, and more money to deal with things. That's one aspect of it. But also when I have more I have more hope, I have more motivation, I have more inspiration, and they're sort of tied together. But that can that's like an element of increased performance and productivity that feels also indirectly largely responsible for how engaged and productive I can be. Is there anything in the study that attempts to quantify that at all,
Yeah,
or is it all just sort of wrapped up into IQ?
No, so we measure cognitive function in different ways, as well as the subjective sense of yourself. So I think this is what you're trying to get to. We do measure, in addition to cognitive function, we measure self-efficacy. This is perceived self-efficacy. So how well you think you are functioning. Empowerment, how much control you have over your life.
Is that like feeling of purpose, or is that different? Like
there's also quality of life. There's meaning in life. So we measure all of these things that are more subjective as opposed to cognitive function. That's literally how well your brain is working, functioning on these tests. So one thing
seeing a similar like standard deviation change in all of them in the same direction, or is it more complicated than that?
It's a little bit more complicated. So let me give you an example of the well-being. So this is like satisfaction with life, or positive affect, meaning in life. So we have a composite score of all these measures. That measure increased shortly after you get the cash transfer. So within 1 month, there was a temporary increase in those senses, but then it declined almost, persistently over 12 months compared to the control group that didn't get the cash transfer. And I think there's a lot of factors that go into this decline over time. One is you kind of have to reestablish yourself in a new environment. You had to move. I think every time we move, we take a hit in our self-efficacy and well-being, because moving is so stressful. We have to make new friends. We left our friends. We feel bad. We feel more lonely. So in that sense, it's not always positive. But in cognitive function, that's we measured in two different ways. One is executive function, and this is not just IQ. This is just how well you can keep rules in mind, how well you can override your impulses to exert self-control. And I think that underlies a lot of our decisions. Like, do I go for a burger or a salad? Do I, work out or not? Do I help this person or not? So there's a lot of those impulse control that we do on a daily basis. And that function, I think, increased at 3 months after the cash transfer. And in terms of cognitive function, we actually saw a decrement shortly after the cash transfer. At 1 month, actually was lower than control. And the reason was, I think this is one really interesting result, which is after people get the cash transfer, they were busy. Their life was chaotic. They were stressed about who to tell. How do I keep this cash safe? How do I spend it? So it's like, don't give me more tasks, or I don't even want to talk to you at this point because I don't have time. So at 1 month,
and this is a one-time transfer too, or a monthly transfer?
This is different from the monthly payments. This is just one-time transfer.
One-time transfer.
That's right. Of $7,500.
I should put out that the Canadian model should also consider doing it monthly upfront money. There's a lot of benefits,
which is what a lot of the U.S. models are doing, right? So there's a lot. I think it may not hold true with monthly payments. So this is one time.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure, and it's like, what if I blow it? Whereas you get a lot. We actually did weekly in ours, both because the amount of time it takes to be in trouble and starve is a week, not a month, and also you get to try again every week. It's like an allowance.
So I think you're better at smoothing, right? Like it's easier to manage with monthly or
and
weekly
learning.
payments. Exactly, and planning too.
Yeah.
So for all these reasons, I mean, we see mixed results with that. But I do think that if I can just temporarily relieve your financial concerns, that will directly translate to a cognitive benefit and bandwidth benefit.
Yeah, I think I think one of like potentially the biggest impact of basic income is all about security, like lifelong security, and the impact that has on stress, and the impact that stress is having on our total collective cognitive capacity. It leads to so many things. Like I even one of my favorite papers most recently that I read was tying cognitive capacity, cognitive burdens to even the existence of belief traps, and the impact on conspiracy theories. And so it's like a stressed out population is more likely to believe in black and white thinking because it's a simplifying mechanism. Like if you're looking for if you're living a stressed out life, you kind of got tunnel vision, and you can only really think in terms of simplistic stuff. And if a conspiracy theory is great at providing this really simple answer and providing this sense of like a little bit more control in your life, like what the problem is, and this explains it. And so you get into that, and it causes all these other issues. And I just think that if people, it's not so much the boost in resources that basic income provides, like being able to buy food, shelter. It's very important, but the feeling of knowing that you're going to be able to do that every month, regardless, that reduction in stress and effectively increase in cognitive capacity is just massive for the impact on society as a whole across all kinds of different um, uh, measurements, and including the potential improvement of democracy itself.
Yeah, and then also that's a good point. Beyond that, I think falling for scams is another problem. I think the scammers are preying mostly on low income individuals, and I think that there's a reason why low income folks fall for those scams. Is that one, their bandwidth is already limited, severely limited, so they're more prone to believing what the scammers are saying. And the scammers typically use financial reasons, like you owe this debt, or your close friend of yours or family member of yours is now being, whatever, in danger or something. So they don't have enough bandwidth to process whether that's true or not. And I think that's another kind of a consequence of poverty.
I mean, also, I have the bandwidth to know that lottery is BS and it's just a tax on being poor. But when I'm struggling and the Powerball's up there, it's still like it's easy to get into the fantasy. Like when nothing's going your way, even the hint of something, even if intellectually it's not legit or whatever, it's just having some hope. Like we run on hope and purpose, and it's like just an inkling that maybe it's possible is better than I know it's not going to happen. I'm just going to, keep grinding in this forever hell. It's, you open up people's just general, not just their capacity for thought, but their capacity for belief in themselves in the future. You add the light at the end of the tunnel, all of a sudden, you can see where they're going.
Forward Party superfan, you are the next contestant on ITSA Space. Do you have a question for Jay-Z?
Yeah, I've noticed a lot here in America that when they push for a $15, $20, or even $30 minimum wage, nobody seems to ever fight them on inflation. But every time I bring up UBI, it seems to be the hot topic. So I was just curious if it's the same way there, or why you think that is.
We did talk about this a little before. I don't know if you came in.
Well, yeah, let's still good. We didn't really get into the minimum wage part of Canada. We just mentioned what it was, and it was separate from the discussion. But yeah, just want to mention, the context of minimum wage and inflation and basic income and inflation.
Jay-Z, you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think basic income has to, take into account the living costs in a given region. That's why I don't think there should be a national amount, like this a standardized national amount, because that doesn't make sense given where you live. I mean, but I think this individual also brought up the polarizing, the hot topic issue. I think I'm still trying to understand why BI is so controversial. It's still controversial. And I'm trying to understand the pushback, especially from the conservative side. I really want to understand their reasons for not, wanting to do this. And I have yet heard a good reason not to. I mean, I've talked to a lot of folks, and most of my economists who are actually somewhat opposed basic income. And I have not heard a good reason, and yet there's so much resistance in the public still.
Yeah, and I would say a good reality-based reason. Like there's lots of reasons that people feel are good reasons, but they're actually just not based in reality.
I think people are searching too because we haven't communicated it well enough. I don't really think that's our fault. It's just different enough from the system we have in place that it's not intuitive, even though I think once it exists, it'll feel intuitive to people. But wrapping people's heads around something that's so different from a scarcity competition, paradigm that we grew up in, it just feels alien. And so it's fear of the unknown, maybe fear of I don't know what this is. I don't really get it, or I have a very limited understanding. Better safe than sorry, devil you know.
Yeah, but there's also a moralistic stance. I feel like there's, a lot of the pushback is ideological, right? Like, oh, why should they get the money when they don't deserve it?
The just world fallacy and all the fun that comes out of that. How people feel that, if they're in poverty, then you deserve it. In which case, why would we ever give money to people in poverty? I mean, they deserve it. And why should you tax people who didn't make poor decisions because they clearly deserve all those winnings? And the last thing you should do is actually take any money away from them because they deserve it, because they're winners. It's really difficult to break through that that whole zeitgeist.
I mean, that's what I mean. That's what we're used to. That's how we're used to thinking about it. And to think otherwise is counterintuitive because we've never done it before. It's like our religion is a meritocracy, essentially, without looking any deeper into it,
So the convincing side of getting people to sort of see that it is a good idea. So we've got all the data, we've got all of the, we're not seeing any convincing arguments coming from the other side, really. So I was just wondering, it's now a cognitive behavioral question. So is that something that you find interesting, Jay-Z? Or how do you find yourself applying some of that thinking to how we can convince people that it's okay? So without data, without reason, basically.
That's what I'm working on. This motivated cognition almost. If I already don't believe it, I'm gonna selectively take arguments, evidence in, and just to this is kind of like the confirmation bias to confirm what I already believe in. And I think there's a lot of selection in economics or the literature, which is they focus on very few case studies where basic income didn't work or somebody blew through it or something, and they said that wouldn't help them. Actually, in fact, David Green's testimony that was last week, he just was skeptical about the benefits of basic income, and he mentioned women or single women without children that are in poverty, working multiple jobs, and his argument is that basic income is not going to help those people because he
like
has
A
has
then
not,
B? Like, what's the link between those
because
thoughts?
he doesn't think that giving them a basic income will alleviate poverty for these people. He has not seen a case where somebody switched jobs or quit jobs, a low-paying job, because of basic income, and that was his argument.
Has he
Mhm.
looked? Because that's what I
Well,
saw
he's a labor
all over the place.
economist, so he claims that, I mean, this is his specialty. So he said, "Well, as a labor economist, I have not seen evidence that basic income allowed people to get better paying jobs or switching jobs."
Hold on,
Or,
You
you
should
know,
talk to me. I know
and
several personally.
so that's the kind of the selection that I've seen, right,
Mhm.
among the naysayers. And I'm like, but this is not what the evidence says. So I'm still working on cracking this puzzle, which is why.
Right. I think we're kind of in this similar boat. Like like you're no longer you're arguing with people that aren't using reason to argue, or data, or any of like the things that we normally use to convince one another of a truth, right? So what do we have left here to
So
in our
I think
toolbox?
that
Yeah.
that one of the really important things, and one of the biggest obstacles at this point, as far as reaching conservatives, is a lack of like well-known, highly influential conservatives who are really pushing for basic income. Like until we have that, like I have to bring up Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek a lot, and it's like, that's decades ago. And
And Nixon
sure,
helps.
yeah,
Yeah.
and Nixon's support was what made it so close to happening in the U.S. Because pre-Nixon it was virtually impossible, and everyone thought it was never going to happen. And then Nixon proposed it, and suddenly it was like a legit possibility. So yeah, like there needs people for the most part prefer to listen to only those in their tribe, those who they believe are part of their group or community or whatever. And it same thing with climate change. Like you're not going to listen to some, as a conservative, you're not going to listen to someone on like climate rebellion or whatever, far leftist telling you about the dangers of climate change. Like, but you will listen to someone from your church or like someone who you really otherwise agree with and identify with and trust. Then that can be the main determinant. So, like, yeah, there needs to be more conservatives with high influence who actually start talking about this. And yeah, the difficulty is getting that like kind of first highly influential person on board.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to just get it. Well, we've got Jay-Z here. Like, is there something that is there something in the Canadian mentality that is sort of making it somewhat more acceptable to happen like there than it is in the U.S.? Like Canada has like a much better healthcare system, and is that just like is there something just about the way like the Canadians think that
I
is
mean, all the Canadians are
making us
nicer, a little bit nicer
yeah
too.
is that all there is?
Is there
um,
something on the flip side too? The second half of that makes it harder for Canadians.
I
Like,
guess
what are your
how
advantages
can
and
we be more like
disadvantages?
Canada? That's what we want to know.
yeah, I think I'm trying to understand the conservative core argument. Like, what is the core motivation for you? Is it the fairness angle? Is it the deservingness? Is it that you've encountered one person in the past who squandered money away, or like what is the actual core cause of concern here? Um, and I think, I mean, I'm still. I mean, I work on climate change too, so that's
Mm-hmm.
another project
Right,
that
yeah.
that spent take a lot of my time. So I'm still working on it. I don't have an answer of how to get the conservatives on board. I think
Mhm.
politicians. I'm not a politician, but I think politicians probably will have better insight into how the Conservative Party works. There's a lot of tribalism. There's a lot of like, I'm not going to go beyond my party line. A lot of
Mhm.
conservative politicians actually personally, secretly support basic income, but they would never say it in public. So
Mhm.
that's like, how do we break that? And I think having one conservative leader
Mm-hmm.
or prominent figure just to say, I actually support this. This is the sensible thing to do. This is the rational thing to do for our economy, for our country. I think that will carry a lot of weight.
Yeah, and I guess another thought occurred to me as we were talking. You have the Prince Edward Island pilot. It seems to be like well accepted. There's not a lot of resistance. Is that an accurate characterization? Like
There's still some resistance, but I think
within Prince Edward Island,
there's still some resistance, but not as much as outside of the province. But that's the province where I think even conservative party members support basic income. So I think that's awesome. We need to replicate that.
Do you happen to be?
Does PEI get like a pass in terms of national politics because it's like so little and far away on the edge? Like no one feels threatened by it. Like they can do their thing, and then is it easier to do it there?
Can I jump in here? I'm Zach. I actually grew up in Canada, and I thinking about this kind of incrementally. Like social security started for just the person working, but that one was extended. We're starting to extend healthcare in the States. I'm curious to ask Jay-Z about specifically the income for children, and if that could be something we go after. Like we lost the child tax credit, but that seems like a big opportunity.
Yeah, we have the Canada Child Benefit, and that has cross-party support. I think the reason is it's children. We need to support children just as much as we support seniors. They also have basic income in Canada. But anyone in between, like I think there's a different mentality toward that working age adults. So yeah, if you have any insight, Zach, on how to talk to conservatives in your experience, I'm all ears. I'm still working on it.
There's one point that you guys were talking about, like the $500, and in my mind, that's a big one because I think replacing the welfare programs and actually cutting government social services, like if you actually roll out UBI, it's like that's a huge win for more conservative folks.
I've seen that too. Like I position it as a shrinking of government, a lessening of bureaucracy, savings of money, takes away the incentives to not work, and then I also make it personal, and I say you might be under the impression that they're going to take tax money from you to pay for these other people, but here are the numbers, and like most of them are also getting money in pocket. It's like it's for you and everybody. It's not any specific group, but you and everyone to have a little more cash to decide what to do with that no one gets to tell you what to do with. And that's a very conservative and libertarian sort of value. It's like it's none of your business.
I'm not sure if we lost connection there, but my thought is definitely to try to do the child tax credit and then try to reduce social service spending in the government and put that money towards UBI to get it implemented.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges across the country is with all of our pilots, they've really been oriented a way that doesn't welcome kind of conservative support. It's like if in order to run a pilot, you have to agree that you can't replace any existing programs, or that you have to specifically try to avoid that. Like a conservative pilot would say, hey, instead of getting vouchers for people so that they don't lose their existing benefits, what happens when people get the basic income instead of their benefits, and are they happier? Even if they happen to lose more money, like let's say they end up $100 per month worse off because they have the basic income instead of their existing benefits, like be it food stamps or something. Is it possible that even though they have less buying power, that they're still happier and leads to better outcomes? Like I don't know, but it would be a conservative experiment to actually look at that, and no one's really doing that. So it would be great to get some conservatives on board who do design kind of more conservative experiments to build up support for conservative arguments. And so far I haven't seen that.
And also like the coal miners pilot. And
demographics.
Like you always say like, all these pilots are demographically targeted towards democratic issues, democratic populations. It's very easy to write off as like not for us and demonize people. It's short-sighted to do it that way. I think.
Veterans pilot, coal miners pilot, first responders pilot. It would be really interesting to go up here and look at this stuff, besides also like really rural areas to see. So Jay-Z, we are at after 2 o'clock now. We've been here for 2 hours, and thank you so much for joining us. Do you have anything that you'd like to leave us all with too?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure and fun to talk to all of you. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. Um, and I'm very happy to continue our conversation at another time. And for those who want to talk to me, please reach out on Twitter or email me anytime. I'm very happy to chat. This is really a core issue I'm working on. And thanks again for the opportunity to chat.
Yeah, awesome. And if you guys want a fun video, I check out Jay-Z's TED Talk about feng shuiing your refrigerator. I think I'm going to end up doing it myself. She'll make you smile. My favorite line was, my student said, I'm going to help the environment by cutting out cheese. And then he was sad.
That's my climate project.
That's the teaser for her video.
All right.
And then I guess I'll leave with a little plugs for ours. Look at the other ways to get involved post in the thread, and follow all of us up here if you want to stay tuned. Go to itsafoundation.org, comingle.us. Dig around in there and find ways to stay engaged.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. Sorry we didn't get to everyone who raised their hand to ask questions. There are actually quite a bit this time. I think at one point there were like 9 people all wanting to ask questions. So I apologize for not being able to get to everybody. And again, we do this pretty much every Wednesday at this time, 12 p.m. Eastern. So join us again next week or the weeks after. And also you can find all these recordings on the Comingle channel on YouTube. So this recording will be up there shortly too. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you next week, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Bye now.